The Graph API provides us with data for any object within Facebook's social graph and for the connections between those objects. From clicking through the various options presented by the Graph API Explorer, you can see the sort of data which may be available to your apps. Now the question is, how do you access the Graph API from your chosen development language? In this course, we're going to be looking at the JavaScript and the PHP SDKs provided by Facebook to allow programmers of JavaScript and PHP to create Facebook applications. An SDK is a software developer kit, and it usually consists of various libraries and sometimes tools required to be able to create applications to work with a specific API. In the case of Facebook, both the JavaScript and the PHP SDKs are just simple libraries which we can incorporate in our projects to access the Graph API and retrieve or even to add and upload Facebook data. The PHP SDK is a library which we download from GitHub, incorporate in our project, and then upload to the server together with our PHP scripts. The JavaScript library is downloaded via a script tag inserted into the main page of our application. If we look at how we use the JavaScript SDK, you'll see there that we're referring directly to a Facebook-hosted version of the JavaScript SDK and linking to it within our script. This will ensure that we always have the latest version of the SDK and will remove the need, from a developer's point of view, of downloading and updating to the latest SDK should anything change within it. Once you've included the SDK into your code, you'll need to initialize the interface to Facebook, after which you can then log in a user, perform authorization, then after that make Graph API calls or to show dialogues to prompt a user to ask them to post something to their feed, for example, or to send requests to their friends. Now we will be going through the making of Graph API calls and the usage of dialogues within this course. There are various functions within the JavaScript SDK which allow us to make Graph API calls and to show dialogues, along with supporting other features of the API, including, for example, subscribing to events. The ability to subscribe to events will allow you to create applications which react to the login of a user or a change in state or other events which are actually triggered by the Facebook API. Should your chosen development language be PHP, then you can download the PHP SDK from GitHub, where you'll always find the latest version of the PHP SDK, incorporate it in your project, and upload it to your server. Usage is similar to the JavaScript SDK in the sense that you will have to link the SDK into your code, initialize the API, and then use it to make Graph API calls or to use other functions of the API to retrieve information into your application. The difference here, of course, is that the PHP SDK is not dynamically linked into your code, but you will be downloading a version from GitHub, incorporating it in your project, uploading it to your server, and using it. This makes it important for PHP developers to constantly monitor the developer blog and the forums to make sure that they've always used the latest version of the PHP SDK, or should a version of the PHP SDK be launched which supersedes some functionality required by your application, you need to be aware of that limitation and to ensure that you do not replace the SDK used within that specific project. Generally, we've found that functionality is not normally broken from one PHP SDK release to another, but it's certainly a good idea to keep an eye on the blog and to keep an eye on bug posts to ensure that your application will continue to function. Throughout the examples in this course, we'll be looking at both JavaScript and PHP usage for various Graph API functions, and we'll look at the differences between the two APIs, particularly where one API has limitations which the other one doesn't. Before we do that, however, we'll take a look at the basics of a Facebook application and go into more detail into the subject of authorization and the granting of permissions to your application.